Hi class, today we're going to talk about writing procedural text, which is just a fancy way of saying how to write out steps for something. So a procedure is an established way of doing something. That's it. It's just the way things are done. But often other people don't know how things are done, so you have to provide information for them. This could be in the form of directions or instructions, recipes, rules for games, manuals, agendas for meetings, or what have you, lesson plans that teachers prepare for their administration and for themselves. These are all forms of procedurals or procedural texts. So you need a procedure when a certain process is lengthy or complex. Sometimes if it's routine, but kind of important that everyone strictly follows certain rules. An example of that would be payroll instructions, for example, or signing up for direct deposit or what have you. Procedural texts demand consistency. So making sure that if you use bullet points, you start every bullet point with a verb or the same type of word, that you remain consistent in style, that you write in complete sentences or you don't. It involves documentation and significant change. So installing a new computer system, that would require a procedural text. Or if there are serious consequences if something's done wrong. So for example, safety guidelines, those are also procedural texts. Balance is key when you're writing procedural text. You don't want to end up like this guy with a set of IKEA drawers and a difficult to read set of instructions. So your job is to not compose something or put together something that's like IKEA instructions. You want to be mindful that if you have too many or too few words, either way you might confuse your readers. So you have to, as with all business and technical writing, be aware of your audience, who you're writing for. You don't want to dumb something down so much that your readers are confused because you've left something out. You've left too many inferences for them to make, and you also don't want to cram too many words or be too verbose in your procedural text because that will confuse them as well. Some questions to consider to determine if you have sufficient detail in your procedural text. Do users have enough information to complete this action? That's the primary goal here. They need to complete an action. You're providing instructions for how to do it. Is there enough information to guide users in using good professional judgment? Is the level of detail appropriate for the subject? If you're providing instructions, or let's say you're writing out a script for a YouTube tutorial on how to put on makeup or how to change oil in a car. Those are two different audiences and entirely different subjects. So the level of detail is appropriate there. You might need more detail for instructing someone on how to change the oil in their car than you would for applying the correct amount of eyeshadow. Is the level of detail appropriate for readers and appropriate for the subject? Those are two very important questions. And then how comfortable are readers with the subject? If you're writing for coworkers or people at an organization who are somewhat familiar with what you're writing, you still want to keep the jargon and slang to a minimum. No slang at all, actually, but any sort of jargony sort of terms. Try to write for as broad of an audience as possible. But again, that will depend on how comfortable your readers are with the subject. So that's, somewhat subjective. Step one when writing a procedural text is to gather as much information as possible. Take notes. You need to do the research. You're going to put something together instructing others on how to complete an action. So you need to gather all the information that you can before you begin to actually write. So take notes, do research, and then do more research. Gather as much research and ideas and brainstorm as much as possible. And then you can kind of filter out what's necessary and what isn't from there. Step two is to start writing. Once you've gathered your ideas and you've done all your research and you've taken copious amounts of notes, then just start writing. Remember, this is a first draft, so writing is rewriting. Good writing, I should say, is rewriting. So don't think about it too much. just start writing and making. Again, this is an extension of your note taking. You're organizing your thoughts still. This isn't the final text that you're going to provide your readers with. You want to write out actions in the order in which they happen. So start with the first action and end with the last. That goes without saying. Avoid too many words. Just be specific enough to communicate clearly. And then you can see the example there on the screen. Add to the cancellations tab on the spreadsheet rather than supplement the existing records on the spreadsheet with these new ones. You can see how that latter is way too wordy, and the first one is more direct and to the point. This is important, but use active voice. That means there should be a subject in the sentence, a person, usually a person, doing the action instead of something being done to an object. An example would be place the file in the administrator's inbox instead of the file should be placed in the administrator's inbox. Here you have a direct instruction in the active voice, place the file. You're starting with an action word, a verb, rather than the file should be placed, which is passive. Use lists and bullets where appropriate. Don't be too brief, or you may give up clarity. Explain assumptions. Remember, this all makes sense in your head, but your reader may have no idea what's going on. So make sure that your assumptions are valid if you do make them. Use jargon and slang carefully. Again, slang not as in curse words or what's up or text speak, but slang as in slang, occupational slang, I should say, which would still be the same thing as jargon almost. And then write at an appropriate reading level. If you're writing instructions for a manual that might be distributed all over the world, you need to rely heavily on illustrations and write at a maybe a first grade reading level or third grade. I'm not sure. But you need to reach as broad of an audience as possible. If you're writing for a series of rocket scientists who are your colleagues, then you can write at a more advanced reading level because you're writing for an audience that is comfortable and familiar with the subject. So again, this all just depends on your audience. Step 3, the final step, is to assess the design elements. So consider utilizing a flowchart for certain procedures. We'll go over those in a minute. Flowcharts are easy to understand diagrams that show how the steps of a process fit together. You can also use charts and Google Images. I mean, this is for educational purposes, so we're not going to worry too much about copyright. But yeah, supplement if you're composing something merely out of text. For this assignment, you can also make a YouTube video or a Prezi or a PowerPoint. But if you're just writing something, make sure that you include some visual elements. And one visual element that you might decide to include is a flowchart. And let's take a look at what those look like. So a flowchart begins with this kind of elongated circle. And that's where you start and end a process. So it would start with this shape and end with this shape. Arrow down to the next step, and then you use rectangles, which show instructions or actions. Moving over to diamonds. Diamonds highlight where you must make a decision or where the reader should make a decision. And then you can flow to bottom or to the right if they answer yes or no. So if you ask a question here, you're asking them to make a decision, and if there's a yes or no response, you can point them in either direction. So that would be the diamond shape. And then the parallelogram shows input and output. This can include materials, services, or people. So this is not used as often, the parallelogram, but definitely the elongated circle, the rectangle, and the diamond you see quite often in flowcharts. Again, this is not required for your procedural text, but it is one way of going about doing it. All right, that is it for this week. Read the assignment instructions for further details, and if you have any questions, be sure to email me. Have a great week.